My uncle was 5, 6 years old.
We're going to get started, please. Next month, we're having Linda McCann, and she's going to do this civilian conservation course in Ireland. And we all know Rod Stanley. He's been here a few times. We love his presentation, so I'm just going to let him talk to us about the ghost towns of Dallas County.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I didn't know if anybody was going to show up. When I got here, the room was empty. So and still, nobody wants to. Nobody ever wants to
Well,
sit.
they're
in the,
painted yellow, so that's yield.
that sounds like a student excuse to me. I don't like the looks of that seat, so I'm going to sit way in the back. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here to present another Dallas County program. This is a program that when I was working at Conservation, Dallas County Conservation, that I started seeing names of places that I'd never heard of. I grew up in Dexter. Most of you that have been here, I've said that before. And see my Dexter Museum shirt. If you want one, come on down to Dexter. I'll sell you one for $20. So it's good. But actually, we had the 150th at Dexter last weekend.
Oh, did you?
And we sold a bunch of these T-shirts. There were a lot of people. We had a huge crowd in Dexter for Dexter, so it was really good. But anyway, growing up in Dexter and graduating from Dexfield High School, and there's a lot of towns in Dallas County. Woodward's one of them. I mean, they're incorporated towns. I mean, I can go through the list of them and so on and so on. But when I was working up there at Conservation, I started running across names of places that I'd never heard of. I mean, I lived in Dallas County most of my life up until my first 22 years, and looking at these places on a map, and I'm saying, where are these places? Where'd they come from? And so I started doing a little investigation of this and decided to develop some type of program about, I call them ghost towns of Dallas County, and it gets people's attention. It gets people's attention to come. But actually, when you start investigating this, they weren't really towns. They weren't towns. They were places. Maybe a burg, maybe a village, maybe a house or two. But as far as a town, but it gets people's attention when you talk about ghost towns, and people come out and they want to hear about these places. But more or less, there's 22 different places on my map up here, and you can come up and take a look at it, a little bit closer. And the majority of these places, again, I'm having people ask me in this group, I've never heard of this place. I never heard of. He was asking about Snyder. Well, I got a little thing about Snyder on my sheet that I found out about these places, and there's not a whole lot about it, except that it was there and it was a post office. It was a post office stuff. And and when you start investigating these places, all these places were post office places. That was one reason why they were established, was because of the post office. A majority of them, they were there and eventually disappeared within 10 or 15, 20 years. Maybe some lasted a little bit longer than that, but it was a post office stop. They were delivering mail in a rural population. At that time in Dallas County, the rural population outnumbered the urban population by quite a large number. There were more farmers, there were more people that lived in the countryside, so they had to have a way, they had to have a place. And so these places were identified by names, sometimes after people, sometimes just, I don't know where they come up with the names of them. But the post office was one reason why these places were established. Before I go any further, I want to point out, and I call these ghost places too. Ghost places and actually I do a program about this. It's a short program, probably a half-hour program about, I've got blue circles up here. And they're lakes. I call it the Great Lakes of Dallas County.
Oh.
How many of you knew that we had lakes?
I didn't.
There are some people that knew that. The librarian's raising her hand because she lives out in an area where there was one of these lakes. Bruff was a ghost place, but Bruff was actually kind of a town as well. I'm not going to talk much about Bruff today, but But these lakes, and again, to me, they're ghost places because they're gone. They're not there anymore. This one in Lincoln Township, near where your librarian lives, it was called Pilot Lake, and it was like a 500-acre lake. This Swan Lake was like 300 acres. Right outside of Perry, when you go on 141, if you're leaving Perry, going east, on the north side of the road in that entire area, there was a lake there. It was called Potts Lake at one time. You know, the wetlands of these areas were acres. The actual lake was, you know, like anywhere from 300 to 500 acres. Pilot Lake was the largest one of them, but you start investigating those things, and again, you're talking about ghost places, I guess, like the Pilot Lake. There was a guy that owned the property that eventually established the first resort in Iowa, probably, where he would bring people out from the Des Moines area because it was on the stagecoach line, the Fort Dodge Des Moines stagecoach. And he would bring people out there, and they'd have a lodge that they built on this Pilot Lake, and they'd come out and go hunting, or they'd go fishing. Because this lake was about 5 to 8 feet deep. Of course, it got there when the glacier came through 12,000 years ago. Formed potholes. And you know, he established this resort, and they come out and go fishing. Of course, back in those days, there was no limit on what you could catch and what you could shoot. I mean, if you wanted to come out and go duck hunting, you could shoot 100 ducks or 100 geese or whatever, and nobody would say anything. But probably the first resort in the state of Iowa was built there. But you know, another fellow then bought the property. That lasted for like 15 years. Another fellow bought the property, actually drained the lake. He actually ran a canal, or ran a trench from Pilot Lake. Panther Creek is in this general vicinity, but ran it to Panther Creek and drained it off. It's kind of interesting, when they drained off this lake, they found hundreds of buffalo skeletons in the bottom of it. And you know, whether those buffalo got in there by mistake, whether they got in and couldn't get out, or whether, you know, the Indians ran them into there. I mean, the Indians did that as well, but I had to bring that up about these three. The Potts Lake thing, where Potts Lake was at now is where all kinds of apartments and buildings are. I'm guessing they probably have some water problems there, unless they leveled it off, because I mean, it's a depression there.
Where is that?
If you go out, when you're going out of Perry, and you 16th Street, when you go to Forest Park, it's right along the north side of the road, right in that general vicinity where Potts Lake was at. Right in that general vicinity, but it was big, it was large. I mean, I've read stories that, you know, that Indians and whites went up in that area because of all the muskrats and things that were in that general vicinity. So, but, and there were other ones. I mean, but nobody knows about that stuff. You know?
Well, there was a lake at Lake Robbins. At least Mina Robbins used to say that when she was little.
I've got a picture of it.
Okay.
I've got a picture of Lake Robbins.
It wasn't very deep, I know now.
I don't know if Lake Robbins was a natural or an artificial. I don't know, but I got a picture of it. There was a walkway that went out to, and then there was a gazebo in the middle of it where you could take your sweetie out and sit and look at the water. You know, after you got tired dancing, you could head out that direction. But ghost place, to me, those are like ghost places. And again, it's something that was, when I started reading about that I lived in Dallas County, except I lived down here, this far corner of Dallas County, and this was way up to the north, but, you know, just kind of like, yeah, the Great Lakes of Dallas County. But anyway, getting back to, you know, the ghost town thing, you know, one of the reasons why these places were formed was basically post office. The second thing would be, you know, living in a rural area, people like to socialize. So in a lot of these different places, and some that I'm going to talk to you about today, I mean, people in a rural area would go and socialize with other people. People are social animals. People like to get together, they like to talk, they like to, you know, tell stories, they like to do things together. And so some of these places were because, you know, the fact that they could go and they could socialize with it. The other thing was that there was a lot of these places, like Panther, Kennedy, those places, where they would go in and they would trade. There were stores. And there was produce. I mean, people had cream, people had eggs, people had stuff that they grew in their gardens, and a lot of times these people in these stores would buy this material, buy this stuff. And of course, cream and eggs was a big deal. Going in and trading your cream and eggs for credit, or for groceries, or for whatever the case might be in some of these different places. So, post office, socialization, trade. Those are probably the three reasons, excuse me, that these places, the majority of these places, the 22 are post offices though, that were only there for people in the general vicinity to go to. If you're ever over in Forest Park at the museum, in the museum, or the main hall of the museum, there's a tabletop map in there from 1883. And it's got on that map, what's amazing about this map is it has all the people who owned the land in 1883. Go over there sometime, if you're ever over there, look at that map and see how many people lived in the countryside. You will be amazed. I mean, people that farmed 40 acres, people that farmed 80 acres, maybe somebody farmed 240 acres. If they had 6 or 7 boys that could help them, you know. That's the reason why they had large families and that kind of thing. But you know, lots and lots of people lived in rural Dallas County.
Yeah.
So there was a need. People didn't always want to travel to Redfield, Woodward, Adel, Perry. Traveling back in those days wasn't as easy as it is today. Getting in a horse and wagon and going on a mud road, that wasn't always the exciting thing to do. It was exciting going to town, but as far as, you know, actually making the trip. So, you know, some of these places emerged where people could go and they could do their thing, take their products and that kind of thing. So do you have any questions about that you want to ask me before I go on here? Anything? Okay. One of the places that it's a ghost place, and I didn't bring a picture because I talked about it before about as far as the Bonnie and Clyde shootout, but you know, Old Dexfield Park, which is an important part of Dexter's history, but you know, that was a booming place. It actually had its own post office. I've got postcard. There's a postcard I think in the museum that we have over there that's actually postmarked Dexfield Park, but. That one was probably as close to home to as far as Dexter and so on. But anyway, so what I like to do now with this part of the program is I've picked out like 3 different places. And since you're all from Dallas County, you're probably all familiar. I like to quiz my audience to see how much you know. So before we talk about them, and usually my audience is pretty intelligent, so they usually figure it out before I even get to the clues, all the clues through. I'm going to give you clues. I'm going to give you clues, so you know, it's not just that you're going to come in and just cold turkey here. So, but anyway, first clue. And this ghost town, this ghost place is in Dallas County, obviously. It was probably founded by the railroad in 1879.
Xenia.
No, not Xenia.
Miranda.
Xenia's a good one, but
Kennedy?
who said Kennedy? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I got to read the rest of my clues at least. So, it's located 6 miles west of Adel, north of Old Highway 6. It had a reputation of having the finest well water in Dallas County. It was known for giving top prices for grain, so many area farmers hauled their grain there. And this town pretty much died because of paved roads and the Model T, and it was pretty much gone by 1958. The answer is Kennedy Station. It was founded in 1879. It was one of those places that was fortunate enough to have the railroad. But even though it had the railroad, it didn't grow for some reason. I don't know all the reasons why, but you know, there were a number of different railroads that ran by there. The first railroad was narrow gauge railroad. You know what narrow gauge means? 3'6". What regular gauge is? 4'8". Roman chariot, 4'8". Supposedly, that's the reason why they made the railroad 4'8". It's because the Roman chariot was 4'8" width. I don't know if there's anything to that or not. That's what I read. I don't know if you believe everything you read, though. But that's what they said. But anyway, you know, Kennedy was named after Francis Kennedy, who owned the property in that particular area. It's actually a pretty prosperous and thriving town, although, you know how many people they had at its peak? 19. You call that a town? Or you call that a village? Or you call it a burg? What do you call it? I don't know. But you know, but Kennedy was one of the places that did have people living there. Yes.
But how far did you say it was from Adele then?
6 miles.
Okay, that's
6 miles, and Kennedy was located right here. The railroad. See, the railroad, there were a number of different railroads, but the railroad ran all the way right through there. I mean, it went through Little Ortonville, it went through Kennedy, it went through Redfield, and then it turned north and went up to Panora. The original narrow gauge was built from Adel to Panora. And then eventually it went north up into northwest Iowa. But you know, Kennedy Station, like I said, had people. They had a stockyard, they had a post office, they had a lumber yard, they had a blacksmith shop. They had all that going for them. Somewhere up here, yeah.
When did it quit existing? I've never heard of this.
1950, probably about 1958. You can actually go out there. All that's left of the town, or all that's left of the place now, is one house. There's one house there. Dallas County Conservation has put up a plaque on the bike trail, if you've ridden the bike trail, that talks about Kennedy Station. They had the elevator was there probably a little bit longer than 1958 because my wife's father was the elevator guy in Redfield, Max Johnson, and he owned that, and he actually, him and another guy bought the elevator at Kennedy and operated that back in the day. But it's there.
I'm gonna look and see if I can find traces of it. That's funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it the dissolving of the post office that makes it no longer a town then? or
Yes, yeah, I mean, like I said, the majority of these places, you know, and I've got the dates on them, were post offices, but a lot of times it didn't last very long. I mean, it was maybe the longest, maybe 10, 15 years it lasted, and then the post office closed, and I don't know whether they had, you know, a different way they distributed the mail, or whether they had to go somewhere else, or whatever the case might be, but I mean, it was more of a convenience thing. I don't know when the rural, where they delivered it actually to your house, I don't know when that started, for sure. I don't know if that was in the 30s, or it was before that, where they actually, you have a mailbox in the countryside, and they brought your mail to your actual, well, maybe not to your house, but they had a gathering point where they had all the mailboxes and so on, and that kind of thing. But you know, the Kennedy family farmed the land around it. That's the reason why it got named what it was. They had a school there, and there's a lady that she just passed away here not very long. Her name was Hazel Whitney, and you talk about somebody that was a Dallas County historian. She's the one. I mean, and Hazel, I got to sit down with Hazel and talk with her for like 2 or 3 hours one day. And when she found out I was doing this, and I think she thought, well, maybe this is the guy that's going to continue to talk about Kennedy when something happens to me. And she died when she was like 90-some years old, and this has been 2 or 3 years ago. But what a fascinating person to talk to about Kennedy. She grew up out in that area and she wrote all kinds of neat things about it. But anyway, she was telling me about the school. They had a school out there because there was enough people that lived in the countryside, and the name of the school was Quail Trap. And she didn't tell me why it was called Quail Trap, but there's another lady that I talked to in an assisted living, and I don't know, I maybe mentioned this, I mentioned to her before, her name was Doris Kipping, and Doris was in Spurgeon Manor, And she's the one that actually got to go, she told me about going swimming in the Dexfield pool, in which she had to be careful when you stepped in the pool because you stepped into like 8 inches of slime in the bottom of the pool. Yeah. So, I mean, she said you had to be careful because you slip and you fall backwards, you know, and hit your head on it or trip over your swimming suit.
Yeah.
Boys had to have a good imagination to see through those swimming suits back in those days, I'll tell you that. But anyway, but Doris was telling me, she said she went to school at Quail Trap. And I said, well, how's it? She said, it was called Quail Trap because one day we left the school door open and a covey of quail flew into the school. We shut the door, we had them trapped. So that's the name. And she was serious when she was telling me this, so it's like, okay. But that was back in the day, you know, when we had quail in Iowa and we could go hunting for quail, and you know, you very seldom see a quail anymore. I mean, on the bike trail in Panora, there used to be a covey of them there, but I think they're long gone. But you know, they had their own school there. The blacksmith shop at Kennedy was operated by a fellow by the name of Albert Cedars. Albert Cedars, and it won't mean anything to you, he was there for 45 years. Of course, the blacksmith was a very important part of the countryside because if you had something break on your plow or on your equipment, you had to go in and you had to, you know, have the blacksmith manufacture a part. You couldn't, you know, take the number of the part and call it in and say, hey, I need this part. The blacksmith would come out and either make a new one or make a new piece of equipment for you. But Albert Cedars and some of his relation lives in Adel. In fact, the guy that runs the body shop north of Adel, I don't know what Albert was to him, but I talked to him one day because he was connected with the Ortons too. But anyway, but the Ortons actually did work with Albert Cedars and making their high wire axe and the things that you needed steel and so on. They had an act that the Sway Bar Act. And again, have I talked word circus to you guys ever? No? Okay.
Yes.
A little bit. But the Ortons, there was an act that they did, it was called the Sway Bar Act, in which Gracie Orton, a fellow by the name of Dutch Ledke, who was her husband, 101-foot thing, a beam, a bar, and they'd climb up there, and then they'd start doing tricks with this thing going back and forth like this, doing handstands, and Gracie did a trick, I'm sure it came from Albert, a steel wire and steel thing that she would start at the top, and it was like a 300-foot incline, and she'd put this steel thing in her mouth and clutch it with her teeth and slide down this wire hanging, you know. So I'm sure all that was manufactured at Albert Cedars in Kennedy Station, but he had quite the reputation of being probably the best blacksmith, or one of the best blacksmiths in that area of the county. But you know, Kennedy was, again, one of those places that eventually dissolved. I mean, people left. The trains, there was 2 passenger trains and a freight train every day that went through Kennedy. One of the interesting things I read about Kennedy was, and you could get in on an Adel and you could in Redfield and so on, but when I was reading about Kennedy, they had a special train that they would you could take every weekend. And it goes from Des Moines, Adel, and headed up north to the Iowa Great Lakes. You could get on it Saturday morning, be up there Saturday afternoon. And then you could spend the weekend at Spirit Lake, Okoboji, get on the train, then come back and be back in your house on Sunday evening. That'd be fantastic to be able to do that today. I mean, I wish we had something like that, you know, but obviously it's not going to happen because, you know, the passenger train thing is, I don't know, we have Amtrak in the southern part of Iowa, which makes no sense to me why we don't have it through central Iowa.
Yeah.
You're talking about money. I mean, you're talking about...
It's because of the coal trains.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about money and people don't want to invest in the tracks, and I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me, but anyway, you know, that was one of the things that I remember about Kennedy Station and so on. But by the 1930s, in 1932, the general store in Kennedy burned down. And if you do any studying of these towns and these places, you find out there's a lot of fires. Like the Bruff store, which is, Bruff is up here And it was quite the place, Bruff was, but its store burned down. But they thought the guy who owned the store at the time burned it down to get the insurance from it. But I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, but you read a lot about fires, but when the general store at Kennedy burned in 1932, that was a big blow to the town. People started going other places to buy their things. I mean, Adel and Redfield were close enough. Again, like Redfield was like 5 miles and Adel 6 or something like that, or well, yeah. It was about in between, so you could take your pick. But again, you're talking about, you know, roads and that kind of thing. Any questions about Kennedy that we haven't heard about before? Kennedy Station. All right, the next one.
Is there a cemetery?
Is there a cemetery? The closest cemetery from Kennedy is Panther Creek. The Panther Creek.
Possibly ever been called Triangle Inn?
Triangle Inn is on Highway 6
So
east
where's it from that?
west. West about probably 3 miles. And you have to go back on Old 6, you got to take a gravel road north, and then you got to turn, and then it goes back north, and it crosses the bike trail. Yeah, I mean, I know where it's at, and I can look. When I go on Highway 6, I can glance over there, and I know where Kennedy's
My
at.
parents are buried at Panther Creek Cemetery, so I know where that is.
I was just in Panther Creek Cemetery last weekend, checking that out.
What would I find if I go looking?
For Kennedy?
Yeah.
All you find is a plaque that talks about what I'm telling you today.
Okay, very
So,
good.
And on the bike trail?
It's on the bike trail, yeah. There's a big plaque. If you go to Ortonville, if you go up east of Adel, you're gonna find another plaque that Dallas County Conservation put up about Ortonville. At least we're trying to remember that these places were here, because eventually, you know, there won't be somebody like me telling stories about it anymore. So, but anyway, they're just, I mean, to me, they're fascinating places. And I mean, I was too young to experience, although I did experience the next one I'm talking about. I've seen it before, and it was in operation. I actually stopped there. But anyway, the next one. This place is more of a gathering place than it was a town. That's really a good clue. That's a good clue. That could be any of these up here. This is a good one too. I was really good on these. A person could buy about anything one needed there.
And
Okay. This one will help. Well, I'll give you this one first. It had a general store, a blacksmith shop that later became a garage, a tin shop, a creamery, and an ice house.
Panther.
Panther Creek store. That's the right answer. That is correct. I got to read the rest of my clues. They're good. It was located on what was called the Panora Speedway. Highway 64, now Highway 44, about 7 miles west of Dallas Center at the junction of P58. I got to show you this. This is a picture of the Panora, a postcard that I've got of the Panora Speedway.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, it's cool. It's cool. And then I actually have the story, and this story came from Hazel too, that she gave me, because she knew I was from Panora, about how the Panora Speedway became the Panora Speedway.
And the Panora Speedway, is that like, what highway is that?
44 today.
44, okay.
Was 32.
Okay.
But from the Hyperion Club in Des Moines to Guthrie Center, actually.
Oh.
Actually, Guthrie Center was a hub and Hyperion was a hub.
Oh.
But it was called the Panora Speedway. But you know why they call it the Speedway? Think about it. Well, yeah, you go out there today, you get ran over in the morning. If you aren't driving 70, you get ran off the road. But you know why? Think about this now. When you've all been to Grimes.
Long and flat.
It's long, it's flat. How many curves in the road, sir? There's none. You're right, because from the Hyperion
Pedal
Club
to the metal.
to Hyperion Club till you get to Panora, the first curve in the road is the Panora. So, you know, you could wind those Model Ts up to 20 miles an hour and let her all fly. Let her all fly.
You could do the same thing with the pallets when they brought them out too.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, you could let her loose on that, and you know, in the morning, like I said, at rush hour in the evening and rush hour in the morning, there's so many people coming from Panora in Guthrie Center and Audubon. I mean, see a lot of Audubon County plates coming that direction too. And like I said, if they want to make money, and then once in a while they'll set a speed trap up out there, but not very darn often. Those people drive like maniacs out there. But it was located on the Panora Speedway. But this is an interesting article. It talks about some of the people that were involved in the making of it, and how they were so concerned about having good roads back in those days. I mean, that was a big deal. I mean, I do a lot of work on the White Pole Road that goes through Dexter, and I mean, the cooperation. I mean, these people wanted decent roads so people would come to towns. It was the whole thing. The last clue that I had, this would have given it away. I probably should have given it first, but it was named for a creek that ran through this area. Although someone claimed to have seen a large cat roaming in the area, two hunters supposedly shot this big cat and it died in the creek. I read that story several different places, so that might have actually happened, because there were mountain lions, panthers, whatever you want to call them, and of course there is Panther Creek. So that's the reason why it's called Panther Creek, because they shot this cat, ended up in the creek, so we'll call it Panther Creek in this case. But anyway, Panther was started in 1898 when a blacksmith shop was started by a fellow by the name of Amos Royer. That was only the beginning. The blacksmith shop, of course, did things with iron and steel, shoot horses and so on. Then they located a tin shop there. A man by the name of Will Beezer ran that. And from the things I've read about Will Beezer's shop, his work was in demand, and on Saturdays, there wasn't enough room to hitch all the horses because you had to get there early if you're going to have them. He made windmills, and he made pumps for the windmills, is what he did. So, had quite the business. Because of the success of the business, a general store was then thought about. A fellow by the name of Israel Beaver started the first general store there. A group of farmers decided that the general store wasn't large enough, so they decided they wanted to make it much larger, and so on and so on. So they started a corporation, and they sold stock, and they sold $10,000 worth of stock to expand this store on the corner of P58 and the main road that went through there. Okay, the new store you could find everything you wanted. If you didn't have what you wanted, then they could order it. It was going to be put on a horse and wagon. It could be out of Des Moines within a couple days. So it was a great deal for the people living in that area. A board of directors appointed a manager to run the store. He was paid $100 a month.
Wow.
That was big bucks.
Yeah.
Back in that day, that was big money. And they also had a clerk that they paid $75 a month. This went on until 1934, and then a fellow by the name of Mort Schaefer and his brother bought the store in 1934. Of course, the Depression was going on in 34, and that might be one of the reasons. I was telling this story to someone before I started this thing, that the first time I gave this program at Dallas County Conservation, I was sitting at the desk waiting, and I had probably, I don't know, 75 or 80 people that I attracted that day with the ghost towns, because they thought I was going to talk about ghosts, I think. That's probably why some of you right, aren't you going to talk about ghosts today? Well, I was in the cemetery at Panther Creek the other day. I don't know, there were probably some ghosts that were roaming around. No, one of my other jobs that I do besides this, I repair cemetery stones.
Oh, cool.
Okay. I'm actually working on the Dexter Cemetery, but somebody asked me about Panther Creek. I know the lady that's the clerk, and she wanted me to go over and take a look. Actually, it's in pretty good shape compared to a lot of cemeteries, but doing repairs on stones, there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way. And you see a lot of wrong stuff that ruins the stone and whatever. But anyway, I was doing this program, waiting, and this lady comes in, and I didn't know her from, I didn't know who she was, and she said, "You the ones doing the program about Panther today?" And I said, "Well, Panther's mentioned in my program," so I said, "I guess I am." And she says, "I want to see what you're going to say." I said, "Okay." I said, that's okay. So I gave her the stuff that I'm telling you today, and she read through it. She said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "That looks pretty good. Looks pretty good." And I said, well, are you gonna stay for the program? She said, no, I just stopped by to see what you were gonna say. Make sure that you're accurate about Panther. And I said, well, who are you? And she says, my name's Vivian McNally. And I says, okay. She says, I was the step granddaughter of Mort Schaefer, the guy who owned the store.
Okay.
The guy who I worked for in the summertime in Panther store. And so it was interesting talking to her. It was interesting. I thought maybe there was a ghost. The ghost didn't like what I'm saying. But anyway, but it was interesting talking with her, but she was actually a person that worked in the store during the 1930s. But you know, one of the things I did read about, the managers were always friendly to their customers. They were allowed to charge things up to 30 days, and sometimes maybe it went more than that, because depending on the crop and the harvest and that kind of thing. But they did trade fresh produce, and they traded their eggs and their cream, and that's where the term trading came from. I can remember the first time I went and stayed with one of my aunts that lived over by Fontenelle, and they lived on the farm, and they said, on a Wednesday, we're going into town to trade. And I was like 10 years old, and I said, trade? What are you going to trade? I said, I didn't bring anything to trade. He said, oh, we're going to trade our eggs and cream for credit. And that was a standard statement back in those days. But the store didn't have set hours, usually open from 6 till 10. Saturday was the busiest day. Panther was a gathering place. That's where people gathered. Farmers and people came there to do things. There were ball games, wrestling, boxing matches, foot races, horse races, quilting bees, barber shop. It's interesting. It's a barber shop. They had no regular barbers, so who do you think got to be barber?
Surgeon.
Dentist.
Could be. And anybody that wanted to. According to the thing. Anybody that wanted to be the barber, here's the clippers, have at it. Let's see what kind of job you do. You might be the permanent guy if you do a good job with this. But I thought that was interesting. But it had the post office. Well, there were 15. In fact, I don't know who it was that told me that was the end stop for the Adel post office. I mean, that was as far as they went. So there was like 15 mailboxes. There was another lady that I talked to that lived out in that general neck of the woods that said that at one time they had all the mailboxes on their front porch.
Oh.
So all the mail from Adel, the area, would come there, and then the dad sorted it out, put it in the mailboxes, and that's where they came. They didn't go to the store. They came to the porch, the back porch of this, or the front porch of this person. But anyway, they had a big creamery on the premises at Panther. Everybody remember the creamery? Some of you do, some of you don't know what I'm talking about. The thing, you poured it in the big, I can remember my granddad, Stiles, he had one cow, but all they were interested in was the cream, and of course you put it in there and it spins its centrifugal force, and you have the two spouts, and one spout the cream comes out, and the other spout the milk. The skim milk. You know what he did with that milk? There you go. He had pigs too, and the pigs liked it. So the pigs got a big trough full of the milk or whatever there was left of it from that. But the cream was what was worth the money. Is what they wanted, because that's what they made butter out of. They had an ice house at Panther, and the river was like 3 miles east, and they would cut the blocks and of course fill the ice house up, pack it in sawdust, and of course I suppose they sold it to people for ice, for 4th of July ice cream, or to cool down your. And there were ice boxes. They did have some ice boxes where they had no electricity. The ice would go on the top of it, and that's how they kept things cold as well. As the Panther area prospered, and it did, it was hoped that it would become a town. Then there was word that the railroad was coming. You know, most of these places that we're talking about, you know, Panther had the highway, the Panora Speedway, or the Highway 32. Kennedy had the railroad. But, you know, there's a lot of these other places that were out basically in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have a railroad, or they didn't have a main road either. So Kennedy and Panther were fortunate in that sense. And Ortonville, same thing, that they did have railroad or a road that was close by with this. But anyway, the railroad unfortunately went through Perry. And of course, Perry became the big town. There's another ghost town that I'm not going to talk about today that I should, but I'm not because I don't have time. Angus. And Angus,
Where was that?
northwest of Perry. Angus, if you go out there today, where there used to be 8,000 people.
8,000?
8,000. At their peak, coal mining town, 9 companies, railroad center, going to be bigger than Des Moines. Then there was a strike over wages. Miners wanted a 12.5-cent raise on 1 ton. They got paid by the ton. They wanted 12.5 cents more, and the owner said, forget it, we ain't paying that to you. So it eventually, boom, go out there now, nothing. Nothing, except a monument. And I have to tell you about the monument at Angus, the ghost place. There's that Greene County, actually, it's on the border between Greene and Boone County, actually. It's not actually in Dallas County, so I can't talk about it. But it is it's a fun story though. I mean, it is. But anyway, there's a marker out there that talks about Whiskey Row. You know, all these miners that lived in there, you had to have somewhere to go. They didn't want to go home to their wives and kids. They wanted to go have a little entertainment. But on this Whiskey Row, there were 17 bars. 17 bars. And one of the stories I read about it was that, you know, it was on the boundary between Boone and Greene. And, you know, if you got in trouble in Boone County, okay, the sheriff was coming, that's all right, I'll go across the road. Yeah, you can't touch me over here in Greene County. You can't touch me over here. So, but it's an interesting, Angus would be up right in here, if we had the next county up in here. You take 144 out of Perry, and you go around the curve, and then it's on the west side of the road. 8,000 people. 8,000 people. Nothing there now.
Just crops.
Just crops, and there's still coal there.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if they closed
Still,
them out.
it's the last coaling operation in the 30s. In fact, the people that started mining again in the 30s, the old timers told them where they were starting to dig, there was water. Don't dig there. You always listen to old timers, although young people have sometimes a tough time with that. But anyway, so they started their mining operation, and lo and behold, they hit water, and they were lucky to get out with their lives. And they left all their equipment down there. All their equipment's still, as far as I know, still there, underground. I mean, because it got flooded, because they couldn't get it out in time. But one other thing about Angus was they had an opera house there. These miners were cultured. But anyway, this opera house was above a store, and it was a big hallway. It was a big hall. I mean, it had its oak floors, and really fancy place. And when these famous acts, opera acts or whatever, came to Iowa, there were 3 places they always performed. One was Des Moines, obviously, and one was Fort Dodge, and the other place was Angus, because these people would pay them to come there and to do their thing. But you know, that's a classic example of a ghost place. I mean, you can go out there now, and I mean, like you said, cornfields. That's basically there.
When that town closed, they moved many of the houses to
Yep.
Dawson.
Yep, a lot of houses were moved into Perry as well. It's interesting because of those 9 companies, most of them they hired the workers, and there were districts in the town that they painted the houses all the same color. Like red color was the Climax mine. The yellow color, I mean, they were painted different colors to signify the company. But you're right, they did move a lot of those houses when it did close down. But anyway, there was hoping that the railroad, there was eventually a garage, a station that was built there. I can remember that, it was a Skelly station, 2 gas pumps, and they repaired cars and sold gasoline, but the writing was on the wall, I mean, as far as what Panther's history was going to be. I mean, because of, again, the lack of rural population and so on. As more people depended on car, Panther lost most of its business, and then coming to shopping centers, the little burg of Panther faded away. I can remember my granddad had a farm. If you went west or east on 44, and then the first road, gravel road going back north, he had a farm like 80 acres up there. It was along the river. And I can remember going up there and pulling weeds in the summertime. And if we were lucky on the way back home, he'd stop at the Panther store. We'd get a bottle of pop. Knowing my grandpa, it was probably we had to split one. He didn't like to spend his money, particularly when he was paying us to pull weeds. So I'm just mad. No, he was a generous guy. So I mean, I'm just, yeah, okay. But anyway, but I can remember stopping at the Panther store, and that would have been in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s is when that, and it was still in operation then. In 1977, there was an auction at Panther, and everything was sold within a short period of time. And all that's at Panther now is your rock that Dallas County Conservation put up. I knew the lady, Jackie Snyder, was the lady that kind of organized that Panther thing, and I was friends with Jackie when I was working up at Dallas County. She was a volunteer up there, and but I know she had a lot to do with the rock and the thing that went on to remember Panther. And again, I'm glad it's there because people wouldn't know that. I mean, they wouldn't
Did
know.
they have a bad tornado there just before it all got tore down?
I don't know, sir.
I'm sure they did,
I
because
don't know.
there was a straw that got driven into a tree there, and that.
Oh, really?
Everybody had to go see that straw in the
Really?
tree.
Oh, really?
It seems like, a lot of these places, I mean, in Guthrie County, I can tell you 2 or 3 places got wiped out by tornadoes. Like Morrisburg got wiped out, if you know where that's at. And then I was just talking to the guy, Fansler, which is north of Panora. It's at the north end of the lake, which is a wild place now. But I say that, it's a wild place because there's some people that live there, whoa. You're wild guys, you don't want to get caught there, I'll tell you that. But I know my son had a run-in with, he was fishing up there, and had a run-in with some of the folks up at Fansler, and it wasn't pretty. But anyway, but yeah, it seems like there's a lot of tornadoes and stuff. Of course, there was no warnings or anything where people.
Everything was pretty well
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
down
yeah.
there. But it's just that everybody knew where Panther Shore was.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Panther Store was that was a landmark. I mean, on that corner that north of Perry and on the Panora Speedway. But anyway, last one here. You'll have a tough time with this one. It was founded by Colonel James Redfield. Laugh, you guys are going to say Redfield, right?
It isn't.
West Cotty
Wrong.
or New Ireland?
West Cotty or New Ireland? You're just full of information, aren't you? You're just full of it. She's full of it back there. But anyway, Colonel James Redfield, of course, he was killed in the Civil War. Of course, the town of Redfield, it was called New Ireland, founded by the Kavanaugh brothers. And then eventually Redfield buys him out, and he goes off to war and gets killed, and they rename the town after him. But had many thriving business. People lived there, had hoped to become part of Redfield. And it was located 1 mile south of Redfield or New Ireland. And there are actually towns there now. I mean, not towns, but there's buildings. People still live there and so on. There aren't any businesses. It was founded in the 1850s. The reason Redfield founded it was because he and his father-in-law thought that the railroad was going to run through there. So they came out, father-in-law had money, and so they started buying all that land south of New Ireland because they thought the railroad was coming through, and of course, the railroad meant big bucks. It's going to bring people in, it's going to bring businesses in, and so we'll have a town here all set, all ready to go, and when that railroad comes through, we'll be in good shape. We'll be in control of things. Well,
the railroad went like a mile north through Redfield. So they kind of abandoned Westcotty, although at one time, general stores, a chair factory, a blacksmith, and a schoolhouse, and there were mills located on the South Raccoon, and they flourished until about 1864. One thing that I didn't mention about Kennedy, Kennedy was one of those places where they sent a lot of grain out, but it's not the grain that you guys think. It wasn't corn.
Wheat.
It was all wheat, the majority of it, right? Wheat was the thing that the most people grew back in those days. Corn, I don't even know if soybeans were even a thought.
They weren't.
I don't think so. I mean, soybeans weren't even in the picture.
Grow soybeans when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, wheat was easier to take care of too.
Well, you could grind it for your bread.
Right. Yeah, so I was going to say, I was doing a program about Bob Feller last weekend, and Bob Feller had a farm, and it said in order to spend more time with Bob and teaching him baseball, instead of planting corn, he planted wheat.
Sure.
So he didn't have to go out and take care of it as much. It gave him more time. But wheat was a big big deal. And they had several, I don't know, there were like 2 or 3 mills on the South Raccoon River that James Redfield. But anyway, the railroad went through Redfield, so Westcotty was on the main route across Iowa from Davenport to Council Bluffs. And it was also the main route, I don't know if you remember the hand cart, when the Mormons came across Iowa, it went through that general vicinity too. I mean, it's where, in fact, I think Cindy over at Forest Park just had a program about that the other day. Today, there are still a few people that live in Westcotty, and they actually still do have their own sign on the highway. But don't do this.
Where'd it go?
Oh, Westcotty, where is it? Yeah, it's over here on the east side of the road and so on. But anyway, there's a couple other towns that in this vicinity. Xenia,
We call it.
We know where that is.
you guys know where Xenia is at?
I still say Xenia.
Am I pronouncing it wrong or right? Xenia.
We call it.
You know where it's at?
You call it Zini?
Still calls it
Zini? So what do you know about Zini?
Well, it was just over where
That's where
our
we're
farms are, you bet.
It's an old trading post, planted by O.D. Smalling, 1856.
Railroad went through it.
Yep, a few years when population grew, but without the end, being situated in the far northeast county was limited. 1879, there were maybe a dozen houses and a store ran by 2 men named Leeming and Parks. There's a boarding house blacksmith. The reason I have this information because there's a lady that lives in Dexter. Her mother lives in Dexter. Doris Feller's mother grew up in Xenia. And so I was doing a program about it, and Doris wanted to make sure I had something about Xenia. So I looked this stuff. There were 2 doctors. That's pretty cool. Xenia had a post office from 1859 to 1882. There was a schoolhouse. It's amazing how many schoolhouses there were around these places. I mean, every what is it, 2 square miles, there's going to be that. There was a Methodist church. I've read about this Methodist church. Enos Rhodes is the first pastor. Then there's another one down the road, Gardner. That was a little bit later one. That was in the 1900s. That was the interurban. And that was an interurban town in 1906. A small depot, an elevator. Now this guy, John Dignan. John Dignan was a grocery guy. In fact, he had a grocery store in Perry called the John Dignan's Double Header. You heard of that? Anybody heard of that? The Dignan Double Header?
It was up north by the post office, by the old Perry Chief building.
And Dignan, he's one of these guys. He was thinking ahead here because he put a store in Gardner. He put a store in Bruff too. And Bruff, I mean Perry's over here, Bruff's down here. So Dignan put another branch of the double header over here, and then put another branch in over here in Gardner. So he must have been, I mean, he was ahead of the game here. I mean, he saw that there was I thought that was kind of interesting too. In 1917, a new brick schoolhouse. had all 12 grades and had attendance of 120 kids. School was used until 1958. Well, last time I saw a picture of that, not good.
It's not very pretty.
No.
Now, where
But
was this?
This is on Highway 169, the Gardner School.
The Gardner, I think.
The
so.
Gardner School.
They're tearing it down now.
Well, are they?
Well, they've taken out the windows
Yes.
and done a lot of
There-
grading.
all I know is when it was posted on Facebook that it was gonna be torn down, there was an instant response, and then the guy who owns the building came on and said, not tearing it down.
Oh, okay.
That's Carl Harris that owns it.
Not tear,
Yeah.
not
That's
tearing
what
it
he told
down.
me, he's just took the brush down, but
That's,
Yeah, I think
You can
they
see it
cleared
now.
it all out.
it's an eyesore, it's an eyesore, but I'm not gonna tear it down, so don't get all
he don't get in trouble easy without that. so.
Oh, oh yeah, but, you know, at one time, that was, you know, like Angus, they had a high school there, it was like a 3-story high school for all the kids, and there were a lot of people from Perry that actually went to Angus and went to school and that kind of thing, but anyway, so that's some of the ghost places that I picked out today, and like I said, there's like 22 other ones, and there's probably some of these other places that have, so I tried to pick out things that had a story or something to it, so, but yes, sir, go ahead.
When we still had a newspaper here, towards the end, they started printing an article every week or so about the Zini area down there, up and down the river.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just like, it was every mile, there was a little gathering place, clear up and down there.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of them had names, some didn't, but this guy had pictures and everything of everything back then. It was really interesting.
Yeah,
It was hard to read, because when they put it into the newspaper, it blacked out a lot of stuff, you know, trying to copy it over. But it was very interesting reading.
My neighbor lady, I live in Zini, my neighbor lady down the road, I'd say she was the historian of our Dallas County.
Oh, yeah.
Lucille,
Yeah,
yeah.
Lucille.
She lived in Scandia, and she talks
Yeah.
about living in the valley. She lived
Yeah,
down
in the valley.
in the valley. And
Before
she
they
talks
built the
about
house
like
up on the top.
three grocery stores at one time down there. And she's just a very interesting woman.
I don't know why I didn't bring it today, but I do have some stuff about, I got a map that shows in the northeastern part of that county, in that county, I've got where all the coal mines were at, and all this and that. I don't know who I got that map from, but that's very interesting to look at. I mean, there were lots of coal mines.
A lot of coal.
A lot of coal
Oh,
mines
yeah.
that were in operation at that particular time.
So when she talked about valley, what was she, you said Scandy also, where are
The
those?
river valley.
The river, it's Des Moines River Valley.
Yeah.
Scandy is right there, Moran, Zookspur, I looking for, I can't find it, but I have a picture that was in the Des Moines Register, that magazine out in Zookspur. It showed it like in the 30s, but it was, yeah. I was gonna say, and you probably didn't come up and look at this, but the picture on top is what Kennedy Station would have looked like. Those are pictures of the Panther store at one time. But you guys can come up and take a look at those if you want to take a look at those. But and then I had a description. There's a lady that wrote a poem about the Panther store. Her and her husband ran it up until like 1934. They were managers of that. It's kind of interesting to look at, and so on. But anyway, you guys have any other questions you want to ask me? You're welcome to come up and to take a look at this stuff if you want to. But it's been a pleasure. You guys have been a great audience as usual. I appreciate you coming out. And
Thank you.
thank you very much. If anybody wants to, I don't know if it charges for copies, but here's a list of, it has all these ghost towns, places on it. If you're interested in taking one of those and taking a look at it, you're more than free to have that if you want to. Here, I want you to look at this. They actually did have the town plotted out, Kennedy.
Oh, nice. Oh, really?
Yeah, they had it plotted out. I mean, as far as
And it shows where the businesses and things were there.
What year was the map that you had of the northeast
Big
corner?
city life.
What was that one?
You said you had a map of the northeast corner. What year was that map?
Oh, jeez. I don't know what year it was. I thought I brought it, but I didn't see it anyplace. Then I've got some other pictures of this. They're mostly of Kennedy and the Albert Cedars blacksmith shop, and Hazel Whitney gave me these. The elevator and one blacksmith shop and stuff. But it's cool stuff. It's cool stuff.
You don't have any pictures of that lake over there at South Berry?
I've got pictures of Lake Robbins, but I don't have any.
You've got some.